punishment.
All right, since I'm a week behind, I'm going to start my shotgun off with a shot of Jägermeister, which I think anybody can agree is punishment enough.
Ready, go. Oh my god! That just got all over me. Holy shit. Nice. Get that last drop.
Penalty drink. Twisted Tea Party pouch. Jesus Christ. This sucks.
Well, let's make a quick board bet here, maybe.
Okay.
Let's see. Sam Darnold next week is at Tennessee,
Yeah.
and Matthew Stafford next week. Watch, he's going to be on bye. He is at New England. So road matchups for both of these guys. Stafford had 9 points this week, and Darnold had 6. So who you got next week, Darnold or Stafford?
I got Darnold.
Ooh.
Do you want to take that?
I will take Matthew Stafford in that game. I think Stafford had 46 passes this week, so I think at New England, and I'll say Stafford has more points next week than Sam Darnold.
Okay, and I will say that Sam Darnold has more points than Matthew Stafford in Week 11. Put it on the board.
Put it on the board.
All right.
You are listening to the Beltway Wars Invitational Podcast, hosted by Adam Jackson and Patrick Wilton. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Beltway Wars Invitational Podcast with your hosts, as always, Adam Jackson and Patrick Wilton, here for the Week 11 recap show. Patrick, a lot of exciting matchups, a lot of high-scoring matchups, really. Our lowest score being 95 points. That's going to be Josh again. Sorry, Josh. But a lot of good scores here, and maybe a little more clarity with how many weeks ago? 3 more weeks to go in the season, in the regular season.
Is that all? It's three left. Wow,
Hold
man.
on, let me see. So we have 12. Yep,
Yeah,
week
13,
15
14.
is the first week of the playoffs.
Yeah, we're getting down to it. We still have a lot of teams in it. Basically, all of them. I mean,
Yeah.
we still have 11 of 12 teams that really have, I think, a shot, potentially, right? I don't know, if you win out, if any of those 4 and 7 teams win out, then they're, 7 and 7, and that's probably, right there on the line.
Yeah.
So definitely an opportunity for those teams being Alex, you, Tom, and Josh to still potentially pull it off. But very likely we'll need to go 3-0 to do that.
Okay, but let's go over to our rankings Rewind. Rankings Rewind. All right,
I always
Pat.
want to call it recap, but it is
know.
rewind.
I know.
Yeah,
All right, go
we've
ahead,
got
Pat.
what?
I said go ahead.
Oh,
I need to do my
um,
pause so I can put my little thing in there, dude. Come
oh,
on. Behind the scenes editing. Come on now.
are you guys? So I don't. I don't listen, so I don't know what you do. I really
Well, I
don't.
guess you don't really need to. I mean, we do it. So.
No, I have it all. I listen. I listen to like the first one or two of the season. Um, yeah. So rankings rewind. We've got a new leader at the top, knocking me all the way down to fourth. I lose 3 spots. Charlie gains 2 spots with a win, moves to 8 and 3, reclaims the top spot over number 2 team, Sarah, who has now won 4 in a row. She's up into the 2 spot. Both of those teams, the only 2 8 and 3 teams in the league. Charlie leading Sarah by 20 points in the
Wow.
points category. So 1 and 2, Charlie and Sarah, followed by 2 7 and 4 teams. Brian has a 2-point edge over me for the 3rd spot. So very tight altogether, all said and done. The top 4 teams from Charlie at number 1 to me at number 4, separated by just 10 points. Sorry, no, 20 points. A 20-point margin for all of those teams between 1,300 and 1,320 points. Jake loses his 2nd in a row, drops another spot down to 5th. This is a team that was at the top of the leaderboard just a mere couple weeks ago. He is now 6 and 5, as is Dustin, who advances to 6 and 5 with a win over me. Interestingly enough, Jake and Dustin at 5 and 6 have more points by a lot than either of the top 4 teams. We said before 1,300 to 1,320 for those top 4 teams. Jake at 1,421.
Yeah, most
like
in the
a
league.
huge point lead. And Dustin at 1,397. So both of those teams, the top scoring teams in the league, but 5 and 6 in the rankings. Scott coming in this week, gaining 3 spots, 5 and 6, 2 straight wins, moves into that last playoff spot at 5 and 6, followed by the 4 and 7 teams who all lost this week. Alex, you, Tom, and Josh all lose and move to 4 and 7. Everyone dropped a spot except for Josh, who was in 11th, and then we did get a win for Mike in the 12th spot to move to 3 and 8 on the season. So definitely, like we said, a lot of people still in it, but any reactions to this new week leaderboard heading into week 12?
Yeah, I think that the most interesting, as we kind of mentioned, is 7 through 11. Those could change at any point. Anyone could get into that number 7 spot. Even the 5 and 6 teams, still endangered. They still got to do their thing and win 1 or 2 games to really ensure their spot into the playoffs. But these bottom through 8 through 11, the 4 and 7, it's really anyone's game to try to get into that last playoff spot, including Scott there at 5 and 6 as well. So it should be I don't know if we've really had parity like this in the league prior, but everyone, I would say, except for Mike, is really still in the race and still has a lot to play for.
Yep, got to win out. There's 4 and 7 teams. We'll see what happens.
Okay. But let's go over to our first matchup of the week. And that would be Charlie, talking about 8 and 3. Reisterstown Rockets 160.20 to Jake's Carlisle Cheddar 134.58. Strong weeks for both of these squads, but let's go over and start with Charlie first. Patrick, you win the board bet. Matthew Stafford 27 points against Sam Darnold's 23 points. I had Sam Darnold, you had Matthew Stafford. Good on you for picking the correct option there. Derrick Henry, off week here, 10 points, 65 yards, a touchdown. Loses his first fumble of the season. J.K. Dobbins has a nice day here, 2 touchdowns, 18.40 points. Devontae Smith, struggles in this one, 29 yards, only 4.9 points. Cooper Kupp continues as he's come back to really dominate in that Rams offense, 106 yards, 2 touchdowns on the day for him. Nico Collins in his first action back from injury, 54 yards, 7.4 points in their win against Dallas. Jonnu Smith, wow, what a big day. 101 yards, 2 touchdowns, 25 points out of the tight end spot. Jonathan Taylor, 24 carries, but only 57 yards, 6.5 points. Chris Boswell here hit 6 field goals in their win against the Ravens, 25 points on the week. And the Rams defense scores 9. Looking on the bench, Sam Darnold has a nice day. Javonte Williams also has a pretty good day. Only 9 carries, but has a touchdown. Little involvement in the passing attack, but 16 points. And Jackson Smith and Jigba, 11 targets, 110 yards, even with DK Metcalf on the field, showing that he has production value. But I guess my leader, for Charlie's team, I'm just going to go with Cooper Kupp. Lost them real early in the season and week 2, but ever since then has scored double-digit points, 8, 14, 7, and 10 targets in the last 4 games since his return. Now wide receiver number 26, but, it's obviously a top 10 option week in and week out going to the end of the season.
Yeah, we talked about this last week in the context of Matthew Stafford and Kupp and Nakua all kind of back on the field together, and you're seeing it pay off. Now, the one thing I got wrong is I talked about the volume being the key to the success for Kupp and Nakua and guys like that, but in this one, Stafford just throws 27 times. 4 of those 27 passes were for touchdowns, and 2 of those were to Cooper Kupp. Overall, Kupp winds up with 10 targets in this game for 25 fantasy points, 106 yards, goes over the century mark. He has now been really great in every game that he's been played since he has returned from injury. He is 11 points or better. 7 targets or better in each of those games with a 10 spot in the target category this week. He's wide receiver number 2 on the week. Just really impressive to see his chemistry continue with Matthew Stafford in that Rams offense.
And this is going to be kind of a theme of the show, but let's look at the next 3 weeks just to close out the regular season. Philadelphia, New Orleans, and Buffalo. I think he's kind of matchup proof, but I don't think you're scared by any of those matchups. So definitely could see him continuing this sort of points production in at least the last 3 weeks of the regular season. But let's go with
before we move to a bleeder, I do want to ask you just about another kind of leader on the bench here, Jackson Smith and Jigba, who you mentioned. I just want to play this game before you click on any stats. I don't know if you've clicked on his name yet.
Yes, but I didn't look really. Okay,
he's had we've heard his name a lot recently. He's had a couple of really good weeks. What do you think, what player ranking at the wide receiver position in fantasy do you think he is right now?
I'd say mid-20s.
He's number 12.
Yeah.
He's number 12. So, you look at his numbers, obviously it's helped a lot by a 33-point game in week 9, but he has now 2 straight games of 11 or more targets, and he doesn't have fewer than 6 targets in any game since week 3. So, Charlie obviously he's not in the lineup here, and Charlie obviously has some better options, potentially, but how seriously are you looking at this roster and thinking, I think I need to get Jackson Smith and Jigba in this lineup?
The question becomes, where do you put him? Now, I think there is an argument to be made going forward about Devontae Smith and whether you play him or Devontae Smith. I think it's close. The concern with Jackson Smith and Jigba is it's just somewhat inconsistent. Week 6, 7, week 7, 3, week 8. 9's great. And you had the big day, 33 and 16. I guess your question is whether or not you're going to get more of these 16-point games or more of these, 5-point games going forward. Unfortunately, the corpse of Tyler Lockett is still there. He demands some targets, I would say. And Geno Smith has kind of been inconsistent this year in terms of, quarterbacking. He's just a kind of a low floor, high ceiling kind of guy. And if you're needing a ton of points, maybe you're going against a team that, is projected a lot. Maybe it is a good idea just to throw him in there because the upside with him is much better than Devontae Smith right now.
Yep, for sure.
Okay, let's go to the bleeder.
As for a bleeder, I mean, there's not a whole lot to talk about here. I mean, you don't want to talk about Derrick Henry. That was kind of got game scripted there in the fourth quarter.
And I just like
maybe
to say I didn't mention his carries.
You what?
I didn't mention his carries in the group chat this week.
You did not, but which is impressive restraint on your part because 13 carries is clearly not enough for Derrick Henry. Despite the Pittsburgh defense being one of the better defenses in the league, only 13 carries. I don't believe he had any in the fourth quarter or something like that. I think I heard that.
I don't even know if he was on the field during the 2-point conversion, which is crazy.
No, he definitely was not. He definitely was
That's
not on
crazy.
the field for that, which was maybe he was before they called the timeout. I'm not really sure. I know Pittsburgh called the timeout, but anyway,
doesn't matter.
Not going to talk about him. Not going to talk about Nico Collins. A low game for him, 4 for 7. But returning from injury, as you say, 47% of snaps. You'll see that percentage double as the weeks move forward. So I guess really it kind of narrows it down to Jonathan Taylor, who not a lot to complain about. 24 carries is his high on the year. Certainly like that, just very inefficient. Just 57 yards on the ground, just 2 targets in the receiving game, 2.3 yards per carry in this one. That's the outlier for sure. It's he hasn't been that low all season. It's been his worst yards per carry game of the season. So I don't know that there's a lot to make of this against what was a improved Jets defense. They got a couple players back on defense. So
Yeah.
I think you just chalk this one up to a off week, and we'll see if he can get it back together against another really good defense next week in Detroit.
I mean, just again looking at his you have Detroit next week, New England, who's kind of been down as of late, but Denver's not, I would say, an easy defense to play against. Tennessee is a good run defense. So maybe some tough sledding there on a offense that's really kind of been struggling to find its identity, really. Are they going to be run first? Are they going to be pass first? Multiple quarterback changes, things of that nature. So I would say I'm probably a tiny bit more concerned just because, you get 24 carries, only 2.3 yards per carry. That's unlike Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, and I do want to, at the end of these matchups, I want to do something a little bit new. I know we talk about next week's matchups during, the end of the show, but I think it's important to maybe just kind of touch on the bye, especially talking about some of these, like can you get Jackson Smith and Jigba in there next week? Right now for Charlie, he'll play Alex next week. Alex in a must-win situation, clearly one of the 4-7 teams in Week 12. Charlie does not have any bye issues next week, so Dalton Kincaid was hurt this week. He'll be on bye, another chance to get healthy, which is a good thing for him. But other than that, nobody on bye next week for Charlie.
Oh, yeah, so he'll have a decision to make regardless. But let's go over to the losing side here. That would be Jake going 6-5 on the season. Justin Herbert, quietly, I would say, having an okay. No, he's actually quarterback number 16. But, last 3 weeks or last 4 weeks, 24-19, 19-24, definitely becoming a viable fantasy option. Saquon Barkley does Saquon Barkley things. He should have had 5 rushing touchdowns, but, Jalen Hurts steals, I think, 3 of them. 146. 32.80 points. Alvin Kamara, kind of a down game here. Only 16 carries, 67 yards, 10.9 points. And then we get to the or the New York Jets, who just fired their GM today. Garrett Wilson, 4 for 8, 18, only 3.8 points. Devontae Adams, 6 for 7, 72 yards, 10 points. Jalen Reed has a touchdown here, but only 2 targets for 8 points. Kyle Pitts does Kyle Pitts things, 1 for 3, 9 yards. Jameson Williams had a nice catch, a long touchdown catch, 4 for 6, 124 and a touchdown. Sanders has 11, and Pittsburgh's defense has 10. That's an interesting play. He actually played Pittsburgh's defense against the Ravens. Turned out to work okay with him. Jordan Love on the bench scores 20. A lot of people are on bye. Nothing really else to talk about too much there. But my leader for the week, Okay, sorry, technical difficulties again, of course. But my leader for Jake's team is going to be Jameson Williams. Kind of had suspension issues, missed 2 games due to PED, but has a nice day here. And with Jericho playing the way he is playing, loads of opportunities for Jameson Williams, especially the way that Detroit offense is humming. Only 65% snap count, now wide receiver number 32. Obviously, the talent's there. Maybe the opportunity's not. But are we going to see more weeks like this, or are we going to see more weeks like last week where it was, a 6-point day?
I mean, we saw this early on in the season. Two of his first 3 games, he was 11 or more fantasy points, and then you add in week 6 to that after his week 5 bye, 16 more fantasy points. So when he's on the field, he's not going to be your 10 target per game kind of guy. He's a big play threat. The Lions scored 52 points in this game. He gets 6 targets, four of them caught, one of them for a touchdown. So it's interesting. Jake, this is a guy that Jake really likes. In our other league that I'm in with Jake, he actually had excess running back depth and needed a wide receiver badly. I forget the running back that he traded, but he did trade for Jameson Williams as sort of he may have traded like a pick next year to add a wide receiver.
Oh, so it wasn't a pick in
upside.
2027?
No, it wasn't a pick. Let's not talk about that. But he did make a move for a high upside wide receiver you can get in your lineup and have games exactly like this. 20 fantasy points for Williams. That offense we know, and we've talked about how dynamic it can be. It's a high volume offense. It is even with. I'm sorry, it's not necessarily high volume in the passing game, but Goff has been so efficient with his running or with his wide receivers that Jameson Williams can only catch 4 passes here, but still do a lot of damage in the wide receiving game. So Jake will need him badly. We'll talk about his bye situation in a minute, but next week. But Jameson Williams will be a big part of his team down the stretch.
Okay, let's go with the bleeder for Jake this week.
I mean, you can go a lot of directions here, despite the high point total for Jake. But I think we just have to continue talking about these Jets wide receivers. We have to talk about Garrett.
It's crazy. What? It's crazy. It makes no sense.
I mean, look, target-wise, 8 for Wilson, 7 for Adams. Adams catches 6 of them for 72 yards. Only 18 yards for Wilson. I don't know how they scored their points in this game, but clearly it wasn't either of those two guys. They scored 27 points. So you'd think that these guys would have a bigger day. You just cannot have, 14 combined points for Wilson and Adams. You need that out of both of those guys to sort of return the value that you drafted these guys at in the draft. So they continue to cannibalize each other. That offense continues to just not live up to expectations. The whole Jets franchise continues to not live up to expectations. The vibes are off. Everything's off.
Well, I would say the Jets are living up to expectations of them being awful every year. But yeah.
I guess, but this was supposed to be the year, right? Rodgers is healthy. He's got guys around him.
People were saying that they were going to win the NFC East.
Yeah, people were said that about the Bears winning the Super Bowl this year too. So a lot of delusional sports fans in the NFL world for sure. But
sports analysis people, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, does this get better? Let's
I will
take a look
say
at their matchup.
Well, hold on, because I will say Garrett Wilson is still wide receiver number 6. So let's not be all doom and gloom about it. He is on bye next week, but I mean he's wide receiver number 6. I think the more important question is Davante Adams. I know he faded in our draft a tiny bit. I think he went in the 3rd round. If you could check that real quick. I guess I could check it.
Yes. Wilson was 2.3 and Adams was 3.10.
He's got to be one of the most disappointing players in fantasy football this year, just based on where you drafted him. I mean, I know he did fall, but wide receiver number 41. I mean, Jameson Williams is what, wide receiver? Receiver 32, and he missed 2 games. I know Davante Adams missed, but
Yeah.
But still,
Still,
like,
yep, for
yeah,
sure.
it's just
Yeah,
crazy.
for sure.
Yeah, it's just
Yep.
crazy.
And I did mention the buy situation. It is pretty interesting for Jake here. Next week, he is going to be without in a critical matchup against a really good opponent in Sarah, the Ovaries, next week. Jake is going to be without Alvin Kamara. He's going to be without Devontae Adams and without Garrett Wilson and without Kyle Pitts. So right now, Cade Otton is a nice fill-in backup tight end to slot in there. But right now at the wide receiver position, he's got Mike Williams, who had 0 points against the Ravens this week, penciled in for the Steelers to play on Thursday, and Jalen Tolbert for Dallas, who was quiet in the loss on Monday night. He was just 2 for 5 for 21 yards.
Yeah,
So
but he'll
Tolbert
have
and
Tracy
Williams,
back from
he
bye.
will get, yeah, Tracy will get slotted in for sure. The running backs, there's not issues there, but the wide receivers could really pose a problem for Jake this coming week.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah. And I'm also kind of just the last thing on Jake because we've been talking about him way too long. But Cade Otton, I know that it's been good, but you have a target monster coming back this week in Mike Evans. So it'll be interesting to see how his role changes with Mike Evans being there, probably commanding around 10 targets. So, how much does that change is a thing to be seen. But let's go over to our next matchup. Hold on 1 second. Let me find it here. Oh, God, it's going to be mine. It's going to be mine, isn't it? It is mine. Okay, so the Union Bridge Barracudas go to 4-7 on the season, 108.262. The Cockeysville Cox now 7-4 on the season, 133.10. Brian starts Russell Wilson here. Probably a good start against how bad the Ravens defense is, but he really did nothing. The Steelers didn't score a touchdown in this one, only 205, one interception for 6.3 points. Brian Watson, however, had a good game. 16 carries, 63 yards, and a touchdown against Philly. Joe Mixon, monster day. 20 carries, 109, 3 touchdowns against Dallas. Jamar Chase also had a nice day here. 7 for 13, 75 yards, 2 touchdowns. Mari Cooper, coming back from injury. I don't think he was 100%, but 2 for 3, 55 yards. Deebo Samuel, nothing really happening here as well. 4 for 7, 22 yards. Jake Ferguson has a concussion in this one. I don't know if he came back, but only 1 for 1, 11 yards. Josh Jacobs has 21 points, 18 carries, 76 yards, and a touchdown. Fairbairn has 10, and Detroit has 12. He had bye week issues this week, and it didn't really seem to matter with Kyler Murray, maybe not Trey Benson or Keaton Mitchell, but Josh Downs also has a nice day. 5 for 5, 84, and a touchdown for 16 points. My leader here for Jake, I'm going to go with Josh Jacobs. Has a really nice day here. 21 points, 18 carries, 76 yards, and what was probably a harder matchup than some of his other leaders for his team, but still gets it done here. 80% snap count, his highest of the season, if you can believe it or not. 4.2 yards per carry, involved in the passing game as well. Running back number 14, and, he has San Francisco, Miami, Detroit, Seattle. So that's kind of a mix and match of good and bad matchups, but I think that he is close on the edge of being matchup proof.
Yeah, I think he is absolutely at this point. And we talked about him, I think, earlier in the season, and we said, we were a little bit disappointed in his production earlier in the year. He was, and I think we even said on the pod that some of his games where he's scoring, 8 to 12 fantasy points, for him to really live up to the value that you're hoping to get out of him, you're hoping that he's more into the high double digits, 17, 18, 19, sometimes into the 20 range. And he has certainly done that. 3 of his last 4 games, he's 17 or more fantasy points. 18 carries, as you mentioned, certainly getting the work for the Packers. I don't know whether it's been a scheme change for him, but he has been basically 4 to 7 yards per carry in each of the last 4 games after struggling a little bit earlier in the year. So he's definitely finding his groove there for the Packers, and he is now kind of where you hoped when you drafted him in the, let's see, where was he drafted? this is Brian's team, right? So he was drafted as the 2.8, round
Yeah.
2, pick number 8 there. So, definitely getting to the value that you hope to get.
Yeah. Definitely after a slow start, last, 6 games over 10 points. So like to see that there. Who is your bleeder for Brian's squad?
Similar to Jake's team, weird game at the quarterback position here. Russell Wilson
Yeah.
really disappointing, but that was a weird game. They kicked 6 field goals. It was a typical Ravens Steelers historical matchup that we are used to seeing. Kyler Murray was on bye, but I really want to talk about the receivers for this team, just as we talked about him for Jake's team. Amari Cooper, we've talked about him in recent weeks. 2 for 3, 55 yards, and Deebo Samuel, 4 for 7, 22 yards. I mean, these are both guys that you're kind of sitting here mid-season saying neither of these guys are living up to kind of where you hope that they're going to be.
Yeah.
Amari Cooper comes over to Buffalo several weeks ago in the trade, hasn't really done too much to impress anyone. He's still just playing about 50% of snaps. So maybe
He was coming back from injury. I think he was on snap count this week.
Okay.
So he had a wrist injury, but yeah, still.
Yeah. I mean, between the injuries and then a bye week next week in week 12, like, how comfortable do you feel starting him without seeing it in a big way versus with the Bills?
Yeah, I mean, do you put in Josh Downs for him? That's a question. I like the talent. It's just he needs to be on the field more, and you expect the snap counts to be lower once it gets traded over. That perfectly makes sense. Whatever. And now he's hurt, so his snap count was down. You've got to see it. I mean, let's see. After the bye, week 12, week 13, San Francisco, the Rams, and then Detroit. So nothing really easy, but it's games that the Bills should be competitive, and they shouldn't really run away from any of these games. I feel like he'll be used, so I'm more concerned with Deebo Samuel, to be honest. They don't know how to use him. Like they don't decide. They don't know if they want him out of the backfield. They don't know if they want him to be the the one in their offense. Christian McCaffrey comes back, that really limits his role in the backfield. But it's been all year of just up and down for him. Now wide receiver number 37. I know he's missed one game, but was knocked out early in the Kansas City game. So that will affect it. But wide receiver 37 with being drafted in round 3. So it's just been a really inconsistent season for him. You would have thought that Brandon Ayuk being out for the year would have really helped him out. It hasn't. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it now. You got to ride it out, I guess. But, just really just a kind of boggling kind of year for him thus far with how talented he is.
For sure. Next week, Brian faces Tom. And luckily for Brian, Brian's got a couple key players on bye, starting with Jamar Chase, his big we've talked about him in previous weeks about is he the number 1 pick next year? Probably so, I would think. He is on bye, as is Amari Cooper. So, again, the wide receiver position, Josh Downs, you feel comfortable probably there, maybe, at least as a backup. John Mechie is the guy that you probably don't love, that maybe Brian's looking at free agents this week to see who he can add to start in that wide receiver 3 spot. We'll talk about Tom's team in a little bit here, but Tom has probably the worst bye NATO that I've ever seen on a fantasy team. So Brian has a shot to move to 8-4, despite his best player in Chase being on bye.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple candidates you could probably drop from this team: Trey Benson, Keaton Mitchell. Just not involved this year. If this was a keeper league, maybe Keaton Mitchell's kind of, if the Ravens decide to cut ties with Derrick Henry, I don't know why they would. But if they did, he'd be kind of interesting. But yeah, you could drop either of those two for.
Trey Benson led the team in rushing. He had rushed 10 times for 62 yards in this one. I don't know about.
He was on bye. You mean last week?
Oh, maybe. Sorry, that was the week before. Before.
Do you really think that he's gonna upend James Conner though?
Well, I don't know. I think when it comes to having a handcuff, he's probably ranks up there very near the top.
Does he have James Conner?
No, but just having
Okay.
having a backup
Well,
running
then you
back that
just drop
hasn't.
Keaton
Yeah,
Mitchell. I mean, that's
yeah.
obvious.
Keaton Mitchell can go. Yep.
Okay. But let's go over to the other side here, and that'd be my squad. Brock Purdy is now questionable. Great. He scores 18 points, 159, a touchdown, interception, runs a touchdown in it as well. Christian McCaffrey has yet to score his first touchdown of the season, but has 79 yards, 27 yards to the air, 12.6 points. Tony Pollard, absolute. That Tennessee offense looks so bad against Minnesota. 9 carries, 15 yards, only 3.9 points. Marquez Valdez Scantley, though, has a huge bomb, 87 yards and a touchdown, 15 points. Juwan Jennings, 10 for 11, 91 yards and a touchdown for 20 points. Calvin Ridley finally comes back down to earth, 4 for 6, 58 yards, 7.8 points. Mike Gesicki with the big fat 0. I saw a bunch of white tight ends that weren't named Mike Gesicki catching the ball for Cincinnati. I was very frustrated by that. Rico Dowdle, that Dallas's running game just sucks. Their line and their defensive line suck.
Suck.
Huh? Well, yeah, it's true.
Well,
CeeDee Lamb doesn't suck, but other than him, I think he's the only one you can really start. 4.4 points for Rico Dowdle. Bates has 12, and Minnesota's defense has 13. On the bench here, nothing really to talk about. I had a lot of buys. Jane Daniels struggles in this one. Has an okay day, but only 13 points on the week. My leader for this squad is going to be Juwan Jennings. Now wide receiver number 19. He seems to be the biggest beneficiary from Brandon Ayuk going out for the year. It's very odd that, I think that he is the number one wide receiver on this team with how Deebo Samuel has kind of been inconsistent. He has 11 targets in this one. He had 11 targets last week as well for 91 yards and a touchdown in this one. So I'm interested to get your take on this. He's wide receiver 19 right now. He's missed 2 games, week 7, week 8. So he had the big 41-point week in week 3. But how do you see his value? His next 3 are Green Bay, Buffalo, Chicago. Is he a wide receiver 2 going forward, or are you less optimistic?
Matchups on the tougher side moving forward, but what I'm happy about here is to see that his yards per target is down to 8. Earlier on the season, his first 3 weeks of the season, he had weeks of 9, 12, 14, and 14. He settled in the last 2 weeks into this 8 range, which means that they are looking at him as kind of an all-purpose receiver. He's not just the down the field kind of bomb it up and 2 for 4 kind of game. He is a possession receiver, 11 targets, as you mentioned, in each of the last 2 games, playing over 90% of snaps. The kind of guy that benefits hugely from McCaffrey being back. McCaffrey is drawing those defenses in, catching balls out of the backfield. He's targeted 5 more times this game. McCaffrey is. So it just opens up the middle of the field for Juwan Jennings to really have an efficient day. 10 for 11 is impressive, and I think it's you've got a good wide receiving core, but certainly he can be a flex. Looking at it, he's probably a starting wide receiver for you for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, for sure. My running backs are so. After my first 2, my running backs are awful. I would even say Tony Pollard's kind of scary. But who is my bleeder here for this week?
Again, I'm going to combine guys. You already mentioned them, but Rico Dowdle and Tony Pollard, just the 2 of the 3 running backs here, both scoring under 5 fantasy points. Yeah. Really a tough situation for you. 9 carries for Tony Pollard, 10 carries for Rico Dowdle, just not the volume. These are 2 offenses that just are not good, and which we know 2 teams that are not very good. Both of them playing with negative game scripts is always a problem for the running back position. I don't know. I would think that their schedule is going to really maybe impact which of those guys is going to be a starter for you in future weeks. You've got Dowdle next week against the Commanders, which is a good matchup for running backs. You've got Pollard next week against the Houston Texans, which is a really bad matchup. So of the 2, I don't know. I don't know what your situation is next week, if you'll have to start one or both of them, but probably looks like
I could start one.
Yeah, so it looks like Dowdle has a much more favorable matchup at this point.
Yeah, yeah. I'll don't worry. No matter which one it is, I'll pick the wrong one with that. But I did have Malik Neighbors, Mike Evans, and Trey McBride on bye, so that really hurt me. They will all be back next week against Dustin. So,
Yep, not a lot of buy issues next week for you. Valdez Scantling, who was a nice, I assume you picked him up on waivers. I haven't been monitoring the waivers or free agency very much, but I assume that's a pickup. So he'll be on buy, as will Gasicki. So not a lot of buy issues for you next week. As
Gasicki
you,
will not be on my team next week, so
okay.
so don't need to
Neat
worry
drop.
about that. Yeah.
McBride back in the lineup next week for you.
Okay, but I'm at 4-7 again. We were talking about the 4-7 teams. Went out. It's easy now. You just need to win every game. There's no
Dustin on
calculations
top
there.
for you next week.
Yep, and he has Drake London out on bye, but we'll get to that.
On bye.
Let's go over to Sarah's matchup and one of the closest matchups of this week, and that'd be the Orchard Beach Ovaries 126.54, 8-3 on the season, to the Finksburg Freaks 123.04, 4-7 on the season. Starting with Jalen Hurts, runs a touchdown in, but nothing else really happening. 18 points. David Montgomery, though, 2 touchdowns on 15 carries, 23 points. Chase Brown, 22 carries, 86 yards. Also very much involved in the passing game for 16 points. CeeDee Lamb, even with Cooper Rush starting, 8 for 12, 93 yards. DeAndre Hopkins, 3 for 4, 29. You know, just kind of an odd situation there in Kansas City. George Pickens, though, 12 targets, 89 yards, 12.9 points. Evan Ingram, 5 for 7, 28 for 5.3 points. Devin Achane, 17 carries, 73 yards, and a touchdown. Some involvement in the passing game. Evan McPherson misses 2 field goals, but has 8 points. And the Jets defense has 4. Looking on the bench, the real interesting one is Ladd McConkey. 6 for 9, 123, 15 points. Kind of interesting little name there. And an offense that's getting much better as the season goes on. So just an interesting name to keep an eye on how if he can, be involved in the starting lineup. But my leader for Sarah's squad is going to be David Montgomery. Now running back number 10. I don't think anyone saw that really coming. 39% snap count, but has 15 carries, 75 yards, 5 yards a carry, and 2 touchdowns. Even catches 3 balls for 20 yards in this one. This is one of the weirdest running backs successful running backs I've ever seen. Running back number 10 has only 2 weeks of over 50% snap count. 2 weeks. But all he does is when he's in, he scores. And they trust him to do that. Anytime they're within the 10, he's getting the ball, and they're just going to run it. And I will also say that if they get ahead, they don't pull their starters. So that's also something to keep in mind as well, that the starters play well into any blowouts, which really help his value as well.
I mean, we talk about him every week. He makes it hard not to talk about him. I mean, I would say first off that the Lions just really know how their identity on offense, they know who they are. They know every player has their role, and they use their players as effectively as any team I can remember in recent memory. I mean, it just seems like everybody plays their part. Everyone, week in and week out, that they're going to be involved in a certain way. And Montgomery, as you mentioned, is the bruiser, touchdown scorer. And Jahmyr Gibbs has been great as well. But Montgomery is just as consistent as they come.
Montgomery is the bruiser, and Gibbs is the slasher. That's what they do.
I mean, two weeks in there against some good defenses where he had 9 rushing attempts, but every other week he's had 11 or more on the season. He's hit 20 once, so he's consistently in that sort of 12 to 17-ish.
He's hit 20 twice.
20 twice. So, never the star of the show, but always a close second to either Amon-Ra or to Gibbs. He is a definite role player. He was a 5th-round pick. I would argue that just based on the draft board and where you got him, Swift goes a couple picks after to Dustin. And after that, I mean, Najee Harris Ramondre Stevenson, Zamir White, Tony Pollard are the running backs it goes after. So we always talk about in a draft getting the last of a round, getting the last
Yeah.
of a tier, right? And I think Montgomery Swift, you could argue Najee Harris too, were sort of the end of that big tier drop off before you get down to Stevenson, White, and Pollard. A huge drop off. So Sarah makes a great pick to get Montgomery there in the fifth, and it's worked out in a big way for her.
For sure. Who is the bleeder for Sarah's squad?
Bleeder this week, I guess DeAndre Hopkins,
Yeah.
4 fantasy points this week. Interesting decision. As good as McConkey has been recently, we've talked about him on other shows. He's currently the number 16 wide receiver in the league. Another guy that you don't expect to be up there. He has had his bye too, so that is that 16 ranking is not influenced by not having his bye yet. So just an interesting decision there to start Hopkins against the Buffalo defense, McConkey against Cincinnati in this one. I think in future weeks, I think it's a no-brainer that McConkey is going to be in the lineup against Baltimore, which is one of the best matchups next week, and then Atlanta, back-to-back super plus matchups for McConkey in weeks 12 and 13. So pretty obvious, I think, switch to make there for Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, McConkey's turning into that Danny Woodhead kind of Julian Edelman kind of, in its infancy. Be interesting to see how that progresses forward. But I agree. Hopkins just hasn't been effective. Really, he does have a 24-point game against Tampa, but it seems like his snap percentage is kind of low with how many wide receivers they actually have. Worthy's unproven. Juju Smith-Schuster, I don't even know if he played in this one. Let's see, did he play in this one? He did, but he only played 36% of snaps, so he can't even get out of going towards that 70 round mark or 70% mark. So it's just kind of concerning. Ladd McConkey is the better option right now.
Sure.
But at 8-3, right near the top of the Beltway Wars Invitational, so can't complain, and wins a very close one here.
Yeah, bye situation next week, tough. We talked about she'll face Jake in week 12. Jake, kind of that 6-5, that around that 500 mark, needs a win. Really could use a win. We talked about his bye issues next week with Kamara, with Adams, with Wilson. But Sarah, also one of those teams that is just super, super affected next week. Chase Brown, who's been so good after getting Brown from me in a trade, he is going to be on bye. Evan Engram will be on bye, substituted presumably by Cole Kmet. And then we'll be without McPherson, the kicker, and the Jets defense. And there's currently no other kicker or defense on this team. Kicker, not really an issue,
Yeah.
but the Jets defense, you'll need to go kind of play a streaming defense for Sarah next week. So I think Chase Brown definitely, not a lot of big stars, but Chase Brown is going to be a problem because there is not a whole lot of bench depth at the running back position. I guess Achane will slot in there. There's not really anyone else I feel comfortable getting into the lineup on this bench right now. I guess it might be that Hopkins will have to stay in the lineup.
Yeah. And, I mean, he does have the ability. It's just, does he get the opportunity is really the question.
Against Carolina, that's actually kind of worked out well. So,
yeah. But let's go over to the Finksburg Freaks, now 4-7, 123.04. Starting with his starting roster here, Pat Mahomes. Everyone talks about how great he is. He's not having a good year this year. He's not. He throws for 3 touchdowns, but throws 2 interceptions in their loss. Only 196 yards this week. Breece Hall, though, has a really nice day. 16 carries, 78 yards, and a touchdown. Also catches a touchdown for 27 points. Alexander Madison, 5 for 19, 3 for 3 for 50, respectable 8 points. T. Higgins, 9 for 13, 148 yards and a touchdown. Brian Thomas Jr., 4 for 7, 82 yards. DK Metcalf, and what I believe is his return. Yep, his return. 7 for 9, 70 yards. Mark Andrews, 2 for 3, 22. Travis Etienne, 12 carries, 27 yards. Brandon Aubrey actually missed a field goal in this one, 6 points. And San Francisco's defense has 10. Looking on the bench, just some interesting names. Tua has a nice day here. 28 for 36, 288, 3 touchdowns against the Raiders. And Xavier Worthy catches a touchdown in this one, 4 for 5, 61 yards and a touchdown on the bench. My leader here for Tom's squad is going to be T. Higgins. Comes back from injury, really supplants himself as that number 2 option for Joe Burrow. And, 13 targets, you'd love to see that. Even in a loss, 9 receptions, 148, a touchdown, 16 yards per target, or 11 yards per target. Like to see that. Has a bye this week, but then has Pittsburgh, Dallas, Tennessee. So maybe not the Pittsburgh. Well, maybe you do like the Pittsburgh one. Is he kind of matchup proof just because of how good Jamar Chase has been? All the focus is going to go to him, so someone else going to get open.
Both of those guys have just been so good. Now, this was a weird game, right? I was watching this one very closely for Burrow, but I was on punishment watch in this game. So, I think a lot of this came late. Burrow, I think, threw I think all of his touchdowns came in the second half. Most of them, I think, in the fourth quarter, and a furious comeback. But 9 for 13. Proving that this offense can sustain 2 really good wide receivers and a really good running back. Heavy volume for all 3 of those guys. As you mentioned, Gesicki was sort of the odd man out in the offense this week. This offense is about those 3 guys, and there's not much left over
Chase
for
Brown,
anyone else.
I would say, as well.
Well, yeah, those 3 guys, Higgins, Chase, and Brown, are the offense. There really
Chase,
is no
Brown,
other.
And Burrow,
Yeah. But as far as the skill positions for sure. So I think he's totally reliable. You look at the numbers that he's put up this season while he's been healthy. He's got his last 4 games, injuries in there, but the last 4 that he's played in, he's been over 20 twice, and his low is 11 points. He's getting the targets. It's his 3rd game of the season in 6 outings where he's been over 10 targets. So totally reliable. It's a shame he couldn't have done this, earlier on in the season. He did start the year hurt. If Tom had Higgins, maybe at the beginning of the year, maybe he's 6-4 instead of 4-7. No, that didn't work. Maybe he's 6-5 instead of 4-7, and he's the inside looking out instead of the outside looking in.
Yeah, in 6 games, 38 catches, almost 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. So that's a great stat line for any wide receiver. But let's go over to the bleeder for Tom.
Well, the bleeder is probably the main reason that he is on the outside looking in, and that has to be 2nd-round pick Travis Etienne, now running back number 40 on the season, in a game where Tank Bigsby missed this is his biggest competition for carries. Obviously, game script was a part of this. To some degree. You look at the score, 52 points they gave up. They were behind big this entire game, but he did play his biggest snap percentage of the season, but only got 12 rushing attempts for 27 yards. He now hasn't hit 50 yards since week 4, hasn't gone over 70 yards on the season. He had his a 2.25 yards per carry average in week 11, and has some really tough matchups coming up. Has a bye next week, followed by Houston, Tennessee, and the Jets. So things couldn't get much worse for Etienne, I would say, at this point, but you just cannot overcome, mediocrity from Etienne as your 2nd-round pick and Mahomes as your 3rd-round pick.
Yeah, talk about top 5 disappointments in the fantasy football. He has to be up there.
Yep.
And, when you draft him, you think, okay, they may lose a couple of games, but he's going to be involved in the passing game. It just hasn't happened. 4 straight games that he's played under 4 targets. His season high is 7 in week 5, but just not involved at swing passes or screens or anything like that. It just they're not trying to get the ball in his hands, and I don't really understand why. But just a huge disappointment. Really disappointing season for Travis Etienne, who was very high on, if you remember, coming into 2024. But my question for you is now, you got Patrick Mahomes at Carolina. You got Tua at New England. Who are you starting next week?
Oh boy, that's that's tough, and it might not matter. So we're gonna get to the buy situation next week for Tom in a minute, which is the worst buy situation I've ever seen. You got to go with upside. So who has the highest upside here? I mean, probably.
Mahomes, right?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, Tua's coming off of a three touchdown game as well. I mean,
Yeah.
the only difference is Tua's coming off of a three touchdown game with 288 yards. Mahomes is coming off of a three touchdown game. Sorry, both of them three touchdowns last week. Mahomes only had 196 yards. Tua had almost 100 more yards than him. So I don't know. I'm split on that. Flip a coin.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the matchup for Mahomes is just very juicy with Carolina. You could see him throwing 5 touchdowns, or you could see him throwing no touchdowns because they don't need to.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really make or break for Tom, just trying to decide what's the best upside play. But let's go ahead and go into his buy situation.
Well, let's start with Brees Hall.
Okay.
27-point scorer this past week. Let's move down to T. Higgins, who we just talked about as being a critical part of this team. Let's talk about Brian Thomas, who's been the best rookie wide receiver on the season. Let's talk about Travis Etienne. I mean, it might not be such a bad loss, as bad as he's been playing, but still, you're missing, really your second round pick. And then on the bench, Tyler Algier, Andre Yoshivas, Atlanta's defense. Forcian is starting San Francisco's defense at Green Bay. Green Bay offense. We talked about Jacobs. Their receivers are healthy. That's a tough matchup. So,
Yeah.
man, just the buy situation for Tom at 4-7 needs a win against the 7-4 Cockeysville Cox. Man,
Couldn't come
I
at a
don't
worse
know.
time.
It couldn't. It truly could not.
Okay, so not looking great for Tom, but we will see.
That'll be a miracle win if Tom pulls that one off.
Yeah, stranger things have happened, I will say. Let's go over to.
I mean, can he?
Yeah.
Sorry, can he fill out a lineup right now?
He's
Like,
probably
I
about to
don't,
drop some people.
I don't know that he could currently fill out a lineup. I'm pretty positive that he could not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll
Some
be rough.
decisions to be made. But let's go over to our next matchup. That's going to be the Pikesville Pink Pony Club going to 6-5 on the season against the Westminster Warbirds, who are now 7-4, 126.08 to 104.14. Let's start with Dustin here. Lamar Jackson, whenever he plays the Steelers, I don't know if it's in his head or whatever, but he always seems to struggle. Only 209 or 207 yards, a touchdown, also throws an interception, which really wasn't his fault, but it counts on the score sheet. Kenneth Walker, 14 carries, 54 yards and a touchdown. DeAndre Swift, as you mentioned earlier, 14 carries, 71 yards and a touchdown, 15 points. Justin Jefferson, just a model of consistency, really. He's always going to get around 6 to 8 catches, 80 to 100 yards, 11 points in this one. Drake London, 3 for 7, 61. Cortland Sutton, 7 for 8, 78 yards. Brock Bowers, just my goodness, the biggest beneficiary of Devontae Adams leaving, 13 for 16, 126 yards and a touchdown. Ramondre Stevenson, 20 carries, 73 yards. Dicker the kicker has 11, and Green Bay has 6. On the bench here, everyone's favorite player, Tyson Hill, 37 points, 3 touchdowns? 3 touchdowns on the day. Really did everything, even threw a pick in this one. Aaron Rodgers scored 16. Baltimore scored 8. Roman Dunze scored 9 as well. My leader for this squad is going to be Brock Bowers. I think we talked about him a little bit, but, just 16 targets of season high for him. Now the number 1 overall tight end in fantasy football. 13 catches, 126 yards. he's really the best offensive player they have in terms of skill position. And it seems like it's getting better and better as the weeks go on. Has Denver, Kansas City, Tampa, Atlanta. So a lot of these games they're going to need to throw the ball a lot, and you're probably going to see 10 plus targets for Brock Bowers in those 4 matchups.
The more I look at his numbers and his schedule and his stats, it's like this is such an outlier, crazy of a season. Like me, I'm the rookie tight end kind of denier, and what Brock Bowers is doing is just absolutely incredible. In so far this season, he's only had 3 games of less than 8 targets.
Yeah, yeah,
3 games less than 8 targets. You know, uh, 4 double-digit target games, including 16 this week. He's got a 10, a 12, a 14, and a 16. He's catching a lot of those. I mean, 13 for 16, 126 yards. Surprisingly enough, I mean, tight ends obviously are running shorter routes, but it is his first time over 100 yards. Um, and he's putting up tight end one numbers despite just 3 touchdowns
yeah.
on the
I was
season.
just about to say that. Yeah,
It's not like he's a Travis Kelce who's like 12, 13, 14 touchdowns a year.
yeah,
He's 3 touchdowns. Um, but after they traded Devontae Adams midseason, he is their, as you mentioned, the most reliable pass catcher. He's doing it all, including the Trump YMCA dance, catching touchdowns. Um, on the season, the other kind of interesting wrinkle here, I'm just looking at his schedule. He's only got 3 matchups on the entire season schedule that are on the orange or red side of the ledger. The Chargers twice. They're moderate against the tight ends, moderately good against tight ends, and Pittsburgh in week 6. The rest of them are either light green or dark green, implying excellent matchups,
yeah.
including the rest of the season. I mean, the Chargers are in his next toughest matchup in week 18, which, as we know, is not a fantasy week. So sets up beautifully for Brock Bowers to continue being a huge point scorer for Dustin. Not something that you will like to hear with him on your schedule for week 12.
I mean, it has to be the best pick in the draft going in the 8th round to Dustin.
Yeah.
Now tight end number 1. My question to you is: next year, he's the first tight end taken off the board, right?
I think he has to be, unless I could see maybe something changes and the Raiders go get somebody, but they're kind of a rebuilding team, so I cannot see them trading or signing a guy.
Yeah, the
So
biggest concern I think with him next year is if they have a rookie quarterback, which I think could happen.
True.
So, but rookie quarterbacks like tight ends, so maybe it's not as big as a deal as I'm making out to be. Who is the bleeder here for Dustin Squad?
Again, not a lot to nitpick. I mean, I don't want to get on Lamar Jackson. You already mentioned it. His history with the Steelers just hasn't been great. But I guess the only thing that I'll mention here, and it's kind of a huge nitpick, are that, and it's not even a bleeder, but it's the wide receivers did not get into the end zone. Drake London, Cortland Sutton, Justin Jefferson all had, between 7 and 12 fantasy points, but none of them got into the end zone.
Yeah.
So it's not really a sign of things to come for those guys. It's just an observation that Dustin was able to get a win to score 126 points without his wide receivers getting into the end zone. All of them had 7 or 8 targets, including guys on the bench. Adunze had 10 targets on the bench. Keenan Allen had 8 targets on the bench. So it's not even a bleeder. Like, it's just an observation. It shows you the depth of this team and the ability for Dustin to win, with a decent score without having his guys necessarily be at their best. So
Yeah.
props. I mean, that just goes to show you the depth and the kind of the solid nature of this build for Dustin.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, definitely Lamar Jackson, crazy. I mean, he can go off any week. Makes it very dangerous going forward. Any bye week concerns next week?
Taysom Hill, but after that
thank
crazy
God,
game,
I don't have to go against him because that would be
totally
so-
unpredictable. Obviously did not start for Dustin, or his score would have been even higher had he given him a flex start. So Aaron Rodgers not in consideration to start over Lamar Jackson. You mentioned it earlier, Drake London is really the only kind of critical piece that Dustin will be without next week. So not too bad for Dustin. He will, as mentioned previously, take take on your team, the Barracudas, in a must-win situation for you.
Yep. But let's go over to the losing side here, and that'd be you. Still 7-4 on the season, 104.14. Joe Burrow, haven't. I mean, if the Bengals were better, he has to be in the MVP discussion. 3 touchdowns here, 356 yards, 29 points. James Cook, only 9 carries, but scores 2 touchdowns for 17 points. Kyron Williams, 15 carries, 86 yards for 8 points. Shakir here has 12 targets, 70 yards, and 11 points. Jalen Waddle, 2 for 3, 37 yards. A.J. Brown, 5 for 8, 65 yards. T.J. Hawkinson, 2 for 3, 13 yards. Estime, who we'll talk about in a second, 6 carries, 16 yards. 3 for 3, 9 yards, only 4 points on the day. Jake Moody with 5, and the Denver defense with 13 on the bench. Nothing really to talk about here except for Christian Watson, 4 for 4, but 150 yards. And just to mention, Pat asked me who he should start, Demario Douglas or Estime, and I picked Douglas, so I will take my victory on that. 5 for 7, 59 yards, 8 points on the day. Wouldn't have made a difference, but I will take my victories where I can get them because I can't win in fantasy.
I think I told you what quarterback to start, didn't I?
You did, and I changed them at the last minute, so that was very good. Thank you for that. But my leader here, I'm not going to go with Joe Burrow because he's obviously week in, week out, but I'm going to go with James Cook. Very impressive. Only 37% snap carry, but they seem to trust him around the goal line, and he's getting that goal line work that he didn't get last year. Has now 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 touchdowns on the season. So even with the light workload, only 9 carries, 20 yards, still able to score a lot of points with those 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, it's concerning to some degree, snap percentage being so low, just 9 attempts on the season, on the day, only his second game of under 10 attempts. Can't say that word correctly, can't find the right word. So yeah, I mean, again, he's consistently good throughout the season. 17 fantasy points this week. He's RB9 each of the last 2 weeks. So he's got 3 top 10 performances in his last 4 weeks. He will go on bye next week, but he has definitely been, I think, as advertised, I would say.
Yeah.
The touchdowns are a total bonus. He is running back number 9 on the season. So I think based on where I got him, I'm happy with that. He was a 3rd-round pick for me. So definitely returning value for sure.
And I mean, you have to be happy about the touchdowns he's getting with Josh Allen not getting those because when they get down there, it's usually Josh Allen scoring. They seem to be going away from that a little bit and trusting James Cook to get it done. But who's the bleeder for you?
Couple options to choose from. I'm going to go with T.J. Hawkinson.
Yeah.
Just 2 fantasy points this week. Obviously missed a good part of the first. Really all of the first half of the season with an injury that he was recovering from last year. Does face a tough Tennessee defense here that is very good against the tight end. But what's concerning to me is his snap percentage.
Yeah.
Obviously, coming off of a major injury, you expect some, decline for a few weeks, but he's been 45% and then 46% and then 48%. So he's not climbing up in his snap percentage as quickly as I would hope, compared to last year when he was consistently in the mid 80s to high 80s from snap percentage. So needs to get going. I do not currently have another tight end on this team. I cannot take more of this 40% snap share out of TJ Hawkinson.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, huge injury, came back. I think they're just starting to, get him up and, get him up to speed. And this one, they didn't really need him too much. Now, you have Chicago, Arizona, and Atlanta, all teams that can score. So you might see the usage go up. You want to see around that 65%, 70 snap count for him for your return on investment for TJ Hawkinson. But what's your buy schedule look like?
Bye is going to be tough. I'm going to need a quarterback. Joe Burrow is going to be on bye. I've been kind of keeping an eye on the last couple weeks, and it looked like Daniel Jones was going to be the best option, and I didn't pick him up because I thought there was a very good possibility that he wasn't going to be the starter. And sure enough, he is not going to be
Just
the
go
starter.
Danny. Just go Danny.
I don't know about that.
Whatever his name,
The
Tommy
interesting
DeVito.
part The interesting part is Scott and I will play each other next week, and both of us are missing our quarterback. Burrow for me, Allen for Scott. Um, Neither of us have a current quarterback on the bench, so both of us will be making a move, um, presumably tonight, to go find a quarterback. I will also be without the services of my two of my Bills. James Cook, who we talked about before, and Khalil Shakir both will miss this game. So a little bit, some definitely some big name players, a couple guys that had really strong weeks this week. I will be without going into a matchup versus Scott in Week 12.
Okay, and let's go to our next matchup, and that's going to be Columbia Clown College getting their third win of the season against the Owings Mills Ogres, now 4-7 on the season, 117.98 to 112.48. Let's start with Mike's team, Jared Goff. My goodness, had a really rough game last week, but comes back here with 412 yards passing, 4 touchdowns for 34 points. Aaron Jones, 15 carries, 39 yards, only 4.8 points. Austin Eckler, 8 for 9, 89 yards through the air. A little involvement running the ball, but 13 points. Tyreek Hill catches a touchdown in this one, 61 yards for 15 points. Quentin Johnson also catches a touchdown, 8 targets, 48 yards for 11 points. Jordan Addison, 13 points in this one, 61 yards and a touchdown. Travis Kelce, 2 for 4, 8 yards. Rashad Bateman, he has to start. I'm guessing that's because of bye week problems. Yes, it was. Only 2 for 5, 30 yards. Q has 9, and Buffalo has 9. On the bench, kind of interesting. I saw in midweek, he picked up Anthony Richardson. Scores 28 points, 2 rushing touchdowns in this one. So interesting play there. If he decides to go with him, Isaiah Likely 7 points, Seattle's defense 8. But my leader for Mike has to be Jared Goff. I mean, coming off the worst performance of the season for him, where he throws 5 picks, comes back against Jacksonville, 24-29, 412, and 4 touchdowns. Now quarterback number 10. Coming up here, he has Indianapolis, so indoor. Even though it's on the road, it's indoor. Chicago indoors, Green Bay indoors, and Buffalo indoors. So he plays much better indoors, and 3 of these 4 are at home. So he's an interesting option at quarterback, and really interesting if you start Richardson or him, in these weeks.
Yeah, he is for sure. First game of the season with 4 touchdowns. Really nice day. That's that 4th touchdown was what propelled him to a 30-point fantasy game against a really terrible Jacksonville team.
Yeah.
Indianapolis also a team that you can throw all day against next week on the schedule. So definitely interesting that he picked up Richardson. I think due to the reasons that you just stated about being at home for 3 straight games in weeks 13 through 15, and all of those next 4 being in a dome. I think he will definitely be the starter for Mike. But yeah, really impressive. 412 yards. I'm not sure where that ranks this season. Cousins, I think, had a 500-yard game, but you don't see that too often in today's NFL. You barely see, a 300-yard game, let alone a 400-yard game. So a big day for Jared Goff for sure.
Okay, and who's your bleeder for Mike?
I want to just bring up 2 names here, and one of them is Travis Kelce, 2 for 4, 8 yards. I think that's definitely the outlier. They lost this game, the first game of the season that they lose, and Travis Kelce was not utilized. I didn't watch this game. I don't know if you did, if you saw what was going on, if the Bills just decided that they were going to take Kelce away. That's my guess. Maybe he had a lot of 2-man coverage on him. So just 2 for 4 for 8 yards. Clearly his weakest performance of the season, except for week 2. You don't expect that to be the case at all moving forward. But I did want to mention Aaron Jones here.
Yeah, that's who I was going to say.
And the reason is because we talked about Mike's team at the very beginning of the season and the age of some of his running backs and whether Aaron Jones could sustain a full season, being the Aaron Jones that you're hoping to get when you draft him. And what I've seen here trending down is his yards per carry average. He's started the season out pretty strong, between 4 and 6 yards per carry. Now, three of the last 4 weeks, he's been between 2 and 3 yards per carry. So really struggling. You got to just wonder, is his age wearing him down a little bit? 29, he's a 29-year-old running back. You just wonder, it's not like there have been terrible matchups here that he struggled against. You just got to think maybe his legs are feeling a little bit heavy as we get into the home stretch of the season.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add on to that point, 97% or 92% snap count, 75, 52, 53. So going in the wrong direction there. Seems like they're trying to save him a little bit, which hampers his fantasy value. Bye weeks for Mike next week.
Well, his bye week's not looking too terrible. I mean, he did get this win in week 11 with his Cardinals, James Conner and Marvin Harrison, both on bye in week 11. Not a whole lot of bye issues next week. He will be without the services of Younghoe Koo and the Bills defense. But other than that, everyone is going to be playing in week 12. So some changes to make. He'll throw probably Seattle's defense in there against the Cardinals, and we'll need to pick up a kicker. So not too terrible for Mike to try to rack up a second win in a row.
Okay, and going over to the losing side here, now 4-7. That would be the Owings Mills Ogres, 112.48. CJ Stroud really struggled in this one in a decisive win, but 257 interception, only 10 points. Jahmyr Gibbs, 11 carries, 69 yards and a touchdown, 1 reception for 54 yards. Kareem Hunt, 14 carries, 60 yards for 6 points. Darnell Mooney, 2 for 4, 27 and 3 points. Amon-Ra St. Brown, what a day. 11 for 11, 161 and 2 touchdowns. Zay Flowers, 2 for 6, 39 yards. Does catch a late touchdown. Dallas Goedert, 5 for 5, 61 for 8 points. Nick Chubb, 11 for 50, 5 points. Justin Tucker misses 2 field goals, 6 points. And the Philadelphia defense scores 9. On the bench, just kind of interesting kind of things. David Njoku, 9 for 9, 81 yards. DJ Moore, 7 for 7, 62 yards. So, kind of interesting names on the bench there, but my leader here has to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. He has now caught a touchdown in every game since week 3. Very quietly, I would say. But in this one, has the targets, his second most targets on the season, his most yards on the season. And, this was the best matchup they could have asked for against Jacksonville. And it showed with 33 points on the week.
Not a lot to say. I won't waste too much time other than to say that this is the third Lion that you've highlighted as a leader in this episode. I mean, we've already talked about Montgomery. We've already talked about Goff. And now we're talking about Amon-Ra St. Brown. Just doing Amon-Ra St. Brown things. His highest target share since week 2 with 11. Surprisingly enough, we know he's a target monster. He's only been over 10 twice this season, with this week being one of them. It's his second wide receiver 1 week of the season, 33 points. Obviously, the matchup helped with that, but yeah, just totally impressive. You got to think he's probably still a first-round pick next year, right? I mean, he's the number 2 wide receiver in fantasy this season. Just continued great performances out of St. Brown.
Yeah, I mean, he'll probably be drafted around the same area that he was drafted this year, I would imagine.
Yep.
He was number 8, probably in that, Justin Jefferson tier, probably now. Maybe not to Jamar Chase, but Justin Jefferson, kind of CeeDee Lamb, maybe kind of territory for next year. But definitely getting good value out of your first-round pick. Who is your bleeder?
The bleeder here is going to be Nick Chubb. Actually.
Yeah, I actually wanted you to talk about him. So good.
And it's kind of unfortunate, right? Because the Browns, I think, are probably just starting to pack it in for the year. This is a player who has had some serious 2 major injuries in his career already. Return this season. I think the Browns maybe hope that they with Watson back this year, that they could be a team. But once Watson kind of just fizzled out and turned into a nothing, I think they're just kind of not willing to run Chubb out there for more than 30 or 40% of snaps in games that they're losing. In games, you hope that this guy could have a few more really productive years for a rebuilding team. You hope that he's going to stay healthy for a couple of years to build your team around him. And I think they're just not willing to throw him out there to the animals who are
Yeah.
probably taking aim at his legs. So Pittsburgh next week, you don't love that. He's just not a reliable fantasy player right now, and
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
look at
awfully
his.
happy in my keeper league that I shipped him off for a decent draft pick next year because he's just not going to get it done.
And I don't think he will be on the Browns next year. I think this is his last year of his
Oh,
contract, but has Pittsburgh, Denver, Pittsburgh, Kansas City. So all good
yikes!
against the rush. Just kind of a lost season. I know that he was a popular late season flyer, just hoping to get back to the production that he had previously. Being a first, second round pick, but just not the way this year for Nick Chubb. Bye week
Yep.
bums.
Not a whole lot. Wait a second. We're talking about
Alex.
Alex now. Oh, sorry, I was on the wrong team. Alex next week. We'll play Charlie, our leader, 8-3. Another one of these 4-7 teams. Alex needing a win. It's going to be tough to get it against Charlie's 8-3 Reisterstown Rockets. He's going to be doing so without Darnell Mooney. He's going to be doing it without. That's it. It's just Darnell Mooney. So
Okay.
he will likely be able to get Tank Dell or DJ Moore into the lineup. So not a whole lot of issues for Alex next week. The only thing that's interesting here, I'm looking at Kareem Hunt's projection, 2.9 points. Is Pacheco expected
Yes.
to return next week?
Yes.
So that's something to keep an eye on for Alex. I think you're comfortable starting Hunt. I don't know that Pacheco is going to be back up to full strength right away. I think that 2.93 point projection for Hunt seems low against Carolina. He'll do better than that. I think you're still starting Hunt.
Okay, and let's go over to our last matchup of the week, our lowest scoring matchup of the week. That would be the Westminster Wonder Boys going to 5-6 on the season, 101.98 to Pasadena Plague 95.88, the low score on the week. So Josh can't say that we didn't tell him that he had the low score because he did. But let's start with Scott's team. Josh Allen. I was about to call him Jared Allen. That's horrible. 262 yards, a touchdown. Also runs a touchdown in for 23 points. Bijan Robinson, 12 carries, 35 yards, 4 for 4, 28 for 8 points. He starts Charbonnet here, only 4 carries for 3 yards, 2 for 2, 2 yards. Nothing really happening there. Jared Judy, 6 for 11, 142 yards and a touchdown for 23 points. Terry McLaurin, 1 for 2, 10 yards for 1.5 points. Alec Pierce, 3 for 4, 74 yards, 8.9 points. Wright, the tight end, 1 for 1, 5 yards and a touchdown for 7 points. Tyler Lockett, 2 for 3, 19. Jake Elliott with 6 points, and Houston's defense with 18. Really ravaged by injuries and buys, it looked like in this one. Sam Laporta, Keon Coleman, Rasheed Rice, Tank Bigsby all out this week. Ray-Ray McLeod, 7 points, and Michael Pittman with 7 as well. My leader here has to be Jared Judy. A great day, 85% snap count, 11 targets, 6 catches. Yards per target, 12. So really, using the, deep routes and really making the New Orleans Saints pay. Jameis Winston really airs the ball out. So we could see this more in the future, and he's probably the best wide receiver they have. I know Tillman is in that conversation as well, but really showing that he has a lot left in the tank, with his struggling years there in Denver.
Yeah, we talked about how they're not willing to throw Chubb out there, so they're just going to chuck it up. Jameis Winston, clearly known for not having fear to throw the ball downfield. He's now got 3 straight games of 8 or more targets. Um, had a great matchup against the New Orleans defense and took full advantage of it. He's wide receiver 4 on the week, 142 yards, clearly his season high, almost doubles his previous season high. 12 yards per target, way up there. So definitely a nice little. I don't know whether he was up. Let's see, was he picked up or was he drafted and held
Drafted.
this season?
Drafted in the
He
12th
was
round.
drafted, yeah, with pick 12. So like, I don't know what you're getting out of him now. You're pretty happy,
Oh, yeah.
based on where you drafted him, that he's a kind of weekly starter for you simply based on volume alone. So he's been really good. 11 targets is not something you're going to complain about.
Okay, and who's your bleeder for Scott Squad?
The bleeder here, who do I want to talk about? I don't want to talk about Terry McLaurin because this is an outlier. I try to use the bleeder to talk about a trend that I'm seeing. This was clearly matchup dependent on McLaurin, probably similar to Kelsey, that the Eagles in this one just said, we're going to lock this guy down. So really struggled here in this one. Um, I don't know where else to go here. I mean, maybe it's Tyler Lockett, like
Okay.
2.9 points against San Francisco. You saw him be outplayed by other receivers on his team. We talked about Jackson Smith and Jigba. It's just unfortunate that in a game against a division rival that Lockett is just not a consistent weapon. I mean, you get these 14-point games, 13-point games, and you follow them up with like 1 and 2. So he's just not a reliable fantasy commodity. He'll have a spike week, but chances are he'll be on your bench when he has it.
I mean, I guess the one little thing is that he's almost at 80% snap count, so he is on the field. It's
Yeah.
just, just kind of hard to trust week in and week out. Bye weeks.
Before we get to bye weeks, I did want to point out, I was watching this game or
Okay.
this matchup because it did come down to the wire. And I want to say that the Texans touchdown was the thing that decided it, or it was very close. I don't know how much a touchdown is worth. Is it worth 6
I mean,
in
I
our
can
league?
look real quick.
I don't know what it is. I mean, he won by 6.1 points this matchup. So if it's 6, either
It
way,
is
the
six.
Texans defense,
It's six.
it is 6. So the touchdown and maybe one of the 5 sacks did it. So the Texans really helped Scott win this one on Monday night. Right, that was the Monday night game
Yep.
against Dallas. So interesting storyline to watch. Scott barely squeaks by. Bye week situation next week. He faces me. Probably would love to get a win to kind of stay in that, basically to stay in the number 7 spot, perhaps, to stay in contention there. Uh, he is going to be without Josh Allen, as we mentioned. That's a big one. And then we'll be without Tank Bigsby, who was hurt anyway, without Keon Coleman, without Ray McLeod, and the big one, without Bijan Robinson next
Oof.
week against me. So Scott and I both have our quarterbacks on bye, both have our top running back on bye. So it will be an interesting, perhaps low-scoring matchup in Week 12.
Okay, my bold prediction for next week is that one of you two will be the low point next week.
It's going to be either one of us or Tom potentially.
Yeah.
It's yeah. By the way, so fun fact. I actually did my shotgun video on 6 o'clock on 6 o'clock on Sunday night.
Yeah.
I think I did my shotgun video. I'll delete it now. I don't need it, but I felt like I was very, very close, and I was at the end of the day. I was the third lowest score, but I did, and I actually recorded it twice. So I did do two, not shotguns, but beer bongs. Did 2 beer bong videos. Daniel recorded them. Didn't need them, so maybe it was a desperate attempt to kind of get some fantasy karma by doing that in advance of. But anyway, so for the record.
Yeah, well, when I did mine, I had to do it twice as well. So
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
Oh God.
because I fucked up the first one. Yeah. It's been a minute. But let's go over to the other side here, and that'd be Josh, our low points of the week, 95.88. Bo Nix, 28 points, 304, 4 touchdowns. Najee Harris, 18 carries, 63 yards for 11 points. Jerome Ford, 5 carries, 10 yards, 29 yards receiving for 5 points. Puka Nacua, 7 for 9, 123 and a touchdown. Ricky Paracel, I guess that's the name. 0 for there for 0 points. Sergio Tillman, 3 for 8, 47 yards. Will Disley, 4 for 6, 80 yards and a touchdown. Demarcus Robinson, 2 for 4, 19 yards, 2.9 points. The replacement for Buckert only scores 3, and the Chargers score 0. Had a couple people on bye here. Zach Ertz is really the only name to kind of be interesting here. 6 for 7, 47 yards and a touchdown, 2-point conversion as well. My leader for Josh's squad, is Bo Nix. Now quarterback number 7 on the season.
Wow.
Believe it or
Wow.
not.
Amazing.
Getting better and better as the weeks go on. You know, he's now thrown 6 touchdowns, 0 interceptions in his last 2 games. And has, somewhat of a favorable schedule. He has the Raiders next week, Cleveland in week 13. He's on bye in week 14, but then also Indianapolis. Just getting more comfortable in the offense, and it's really starting to pay off. He's getting the ball to Cortland Sutton. He's run the ball a little bit. He didn't run it much in this one, but he has had 10 carries in previous matchups. So just a young, athletic quarterback, and it seems to be coming into his own to really score some fantasy points.
Yeah, I think you gotta give a lot of credit to Sean Payton. I mean, this is a guy that has a ton of doubters, and he comes into Denver. He's well known in NFL circles of like being the guy who's going to implement his own system. He's going to ignore, maybe ignore the guys that are there who maybe they tried to build a team around previously, and kind of to implement his own system, draft his own players, and give them opportunities. And they have figured it out to their credit in Denver. 38-6 over Atlanta is a really impressive victory for the Broncos here. I mean, high completion percentage, 300 yards. We talked about how rare that is to see in the NFL these days, and 4 touchdowns. I mean, they are figuring it out. I would imagine he probably has one of the lowest kind of yards per pass of any quarterback in the league, but they are figuring it out how to get it done. It's a really unique offense, and Nix is looking like a guy that, could be, I mean, are you drafting him as a fantasy starter next year?
I mean, it's a conversation, and I think it's a conversation that Jane Daniels had really came out of the start really well, but he's starting to kind of catch up to be the best rookie quarterback out of this class this year. Just really impressive out of a rookie quarterback to be quarterback number 7. Who is your bleeder for Josh's squad?
Well, I guess we're going to look at the goose egg for, there are a couple goose eggs here. And I guess I'll talk about both of them. But Ricky Pearsall, after a really good kind of breakout performance in the NFL, his first as a rookie where he went caught 4 of his 6 passes last week for 73 yards and a touchdown, comes back to earth. We saw Juwan Jennings. His role in the offense is clearly, he's a prominent player in that offense. Christian McCaffrey, of course, and Deebo Samuel still getting targets. Ricky Pearsall is probably, maybe he's a future kind of guy in a season or two, but I just don't see his role in the offense being enough that you can afford to start him in fantasy right now.
Yeah, just too many options. Even George Kittle was out of this one as well, so if he comes back, the fantasy, just the opportunity is just not there.
Yep, for sure. And then I did want to mention, just because we mentioned the Texans for Scott, the Chargers kind of exactly the opposite situation as the Texans, who got that touchdown late. The Chargers, on the other hand, gave up a lot of points to Joe Burrow late. I think this game was 27-7, perhaps, or something like that early. The Bengals were way down. The Chargers were playing really well. Their defense has been really good this year. They gave up all those late touchdowns to end up with 0 fantasy points. So the defenses alone in this one really swung this win to Scott.
Yeah, I mean, it's never really thought about either. I mean, defense is kind of an afterthought. You just kind of try to play the best matchups, but when it's this close, every single position matters, and it mattered in this one. Bye weeks for Josh.
Not really a whole lot at all. I mean, Trevor Lawrence, who missed this game, is on bye, so he'll continue to rest up. You mentioned how well Bo Nix has been playing. You know, he'll have Las Vegas in a dome in Las Vegas there for Nix. But the one thing I did want to get your opinion on, just to close the showdown here with Josh, he is another one of these 4-7 teams. He needs a win. He's going up against Mike, a 3-8 team. But I'm concerned though, like how tempting is it going to be to throw Pacheco in there in his first game back from injury, and you're going to get George Kittle back, who just missed this past week from injury. So you're going to have two of your star players coming back from injury playing next week. You have to be a little bit nervous for both of those guys.
You got to play him for Ford.
Yeah, you do. You do.
In terms of Disley, though, Disley's kind of middling. His best game of the season this week. I think you got to play Kittle anyway. Especially as a full week of practice. I mean, if he's full on Wednesday, nothing to worry about there. You got to start your studs when they're playing. And there was conversations a couple weeks ago about when Puka Nacua came back, would he be on snap count? And he had a huge day. So you play your best players no matter what. If you don't have really any options, any good options behind them. So you play your studs. Okay, and let's go to week 12 real quick. I'll go through this real quick. I go Union Bridge Barracudas go against the Pikesville Pink Pony Club, 4-7 versus 6-5. The Orchard Beach Ovaries go 8-3, go against the Carlisle Cheddar, 6-5. Pasadena Plague, as you mentioned, 4-7, go against the Columbia Clown College, 3-8. The Westminster Warbirds, 7-4, go against the Westminster Wonder Boys, 5-6. Owings Mills Ogres, 4-7, go against the Reisterstown Rockets, 8-3. And the Finksburg Freaks go against the Cockeysville Cocks, 4-7 versus 7-4. But that is our show. Thank you for listening in, and we will see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening and your support. If you enjoyed the show, please make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify.